the next thing I'm going to do is establish these black outlines that are on the cube. They're not totally black, but they're pretty close. So I'm actually going to use my palette knife this time, and that way I can mix enough. And I'm also pulling out my number 3 round brush. You could use a flat brush for this as well. Remember, you just use the side of it to get a clean line. Either way is fine. Let's see, let's try something a little different. I'm going to pull out some of my Viridian Green. And a bit of alizarin crimson. These are my Christmas colors. Let's mix those together and see what we get. Remember, green and red are complements. If we analyze that a little bit more, red and green are across from each other on the color wheel, which makes them complements. So you get this really, when you mix them together, you get a really desaturated brown, close to black. And green is the result of mixing yellow and blue. So it's yellow and blue plus red. Again, it's just different proportions of the same 3 primary colors. I keep adding this Prussian blue because I can see that the proportion of blue in my green is not what I wanted to be able to achieve the kind of black that I want. So I just added more blue to it. It's all about proportions. Clean off your palette knife. Get your brush a little bit wet. Pick up some paint. This brush is nice. We can just, it's almost like we're drawing. I do really understand the frustration you guys feel with how quickly this paint dries. I mean, it's kind of absurd. There are mediums, painting mediums you can buy that will slow the drying time. If your paint drying too quickly is getting in the way of you learning, then I think you might want to buy. It's called Open Fluid Medium, Open Medium. Not exactly sure why they call it open, except that it keeps the paint wet longer, so that it's available to continue to manipulate. I don't use an open medium generally. I do if I'm trying to do some soft blending or something, because I know that takes a lot more time. But in a painting like this, I generally won't. I'm more interested in covering the area, and I don't need to be too precious about anything. I just really got to get the paint on the canvas. So forces me to move fast, and sometimes I need that. Sometimes I need something to kind of fight against when I'm painting. Does that make sense? You ever need some parameters that are gonna sort of force you to do things? It's like a deadline, right? It is. It's a paint. The paint has this very short deadline. You got to get it on the canvas before it dries. And I'm just not, the lines are not the same width. They're not very clean. And that's totally okay, because we're going to come back in and add color, which will force those lines to clean up a little bit. I want to show you something. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, over here on the right, see how my brushstroke sort of fades? What's happening, you can probably tell, especially if you've done this in person, is that the paint catches the higher peaks of the canvas, and then it doesn't go into the little valleys in the weave of the canvas. And it causes that sort of spackled look. That look is not desirable on the first layer. Later, when you've got a bunch of layers, it can be really cool, and I can show you how to use it properly. But in the beginning, you absolutely do not want that. I am seeing a lot of that in the homework assignments, and it should be avoided at all costs. Something else about mixing with water. When I'm mixing water into my paint, a lot of acrylic painters will tell you not to mix water into your paint really at all. Instead, to use a medium. Mediums are very expensive, and I don't find them totally necessary or even all that beneficial sometimes. And certain things, glazing mediums are, but like I was saying before, the open medium that keeps your acrylic paint wet is not that great. It doesn't last that long. It adds maybe a minute, in my experience. If you add a lot of that open medium, it will help your paints stay wet longer, but it also adds a lot of clear gel to your paint. So then your paint is not opaque anymore. And it kind of causes this conundrum where, okay, now your paints are wet longer, but they also don't cover as much. So again, that's why I have really just leaned more towards using water, but using water is very tricky, and you're looking for a consistency that allows you to move the paint easily, spread it evenly, but is not chunky. It's not too thin. You really still need that coverage on the canvas. Opaque coverage, solid coverage. So if you have the money to try out the open medium, you might want to try it. It might work better for you. It just hasn't worked great for me. Okay, that looks not great, but that's all right. That's where we're at. And the beginning stages of a painting never looks great. I'm gonna let that dry for a second and we'll get right back at it.